Hello. Check, check. Chapter 17. Personal. In these comments on an old journey, now revised after 7 busy years, have much changed men and things in England. I have abstained from reference to persons except in the last chapter and in 1 or 2 cases where the fame of the parties seemed to have given the public a property in all that concerned them. I must further allow myself a few notices, only as an acknowledgment of debts and that cannot be paid. My journeys were cheered by so much kindness from new friends that my impression of the island is bright with agreeable memories, both of public societies and of households. And what is nowhere better found than in England, a cultivated person, fitly surrounded by a happy home, with, quote, honor, love, obedience, troops of friends, is of all institutions the best. At the landing in Liverpool, I found my Manchester correspondent awaiting me, a gentleman whose kind reception was followed by a train of friendly and effective attentions which never rested whilst I remained in the country. Man of sense and of letters, the editor of a powerful local journal, he added to solid virtues an infinite sweetness and bonhomie. There seemed a pool of honey about his heart, which lubricated all his speech and action with fine jets of mead. An equal good fortune attended many later accidents of my journey, until the sincerity of English kindness ceased to surprise. My visit fell in the fortunate days when Mr. Bancroft was the American minister in London, and at his house or through his good offices I had easy access to excellent persons and to privileged places. At the house of Mr. Carlyle I met persons eminent in society and in letters. The privileges of the Athenaeum and of the Reform clubs were hospitably opened to me, and I found much advantages in the circles of the geologic and antiquarian and the royal societies. Every day in London gave me new opportunities of meeting men and women who give splendor to society. I saw Rogers, Hallam, Macaulay, Milman, Barry Cornwall, Dickens, Thackeray, Tennyson, Leigh Hunt, De Israeli, Helps, Wilkinson, Bailey, Kenyon, and Foster, the younger poets, Clow, Arnold, and Patmore, and among the men of science, Robert Brown, Owen, Sedgwick, Faraday, Buckland, Lyell, de la Becque, Hooker, Carpenter, Babbage, and Edward Forbes. It was my privilege also to converse with Miss Bailey, Lady Morgan, with Mrs. Jameson, and Mrs. Somerville. I found her hospitality made many private houses not less known and dear. It is not in distinguished circles that wisdom and elevated characters are usually found, or if found, they are not confined thereto, and my recollections of the best hours go back to private conversations in different parts of the kingdom with persons little known. nor am I insensible to the courtesy which frankly opened to me some noble mansions, if I do not adorn my page with their names. Among the privileges of London, I recall with pleasure 2 or 3 signal days, one at Kew, where Sir William Hooker showed me all the riches of the vast botanic garden, one at the museum, where Sir Charles Fellows explained in detail the history of his Ionic trophy monument, and still another, on which Mr. Owen accompanied my countryman, Mr. H., and myself through the Hunterian Museum. The like frank hospitality, bent on real service, I found among the great and the humble wherever I went, in Birmingham, in Oxford, in Leicester, in Nottingham, in Sheffield, in Manchester, in Liverpool, at Edinburgh. Through the kindness of Dr. Samuel Brown, I made the acquaintance of De Quincey, Lord Jeffrey, of Wilson, Mrs. Crowe, of the Messrs. Chambers, and of a man of high character and genius, the short-lived painter, David Scott. At Ambleside, in March 1848, I was for a couple of days the guest of Miss Martineau, then newly returned from her Egyptian tour. On Sunday afternoon, I accompanied her to Rydalmount, and as I have recorded at a visit to Wordsworth many years before, I must not forget this second interview. I found Mr. Wordsworth asleep on the sofa. He was at first silent and indisposed, as an old man suddenly waked before he had ended his nap, but soon became full of talk on the French news. He was nationally bitter on the French, bitter on Scotchmen too. No Scotchman, he said, can write English. He detailed the 2 models, on one or the other of which all the sentences of the historian Robertson are framed. Nor could Geoffrey nor the Edinburgh reviewers write English, nor can blank, who is a pest to the English tongue. Incidentally, he added, Gibbon cannot write English. The Edinburgh Review wrote what would tell and what would sell, had, however, changed the tone of its literary criticism from the time when a certain letter was written to the editor by Coleridge. Mrs. W. had the editor's answer in her possession. Tennyson, he thinks, a right poetic genius, though with some affection. He had thought an elder brother of Tennyson at first the better poet, but must now reckon Alfred the true one. And speaking of I know not what style, he said, to be sure, it was the manner, but then you know the matter always comes out of the manner. He thought Rio de Janeiro the best place in the world for a great capital city. We talked of English national character. I told him it was not creditable that no one in all the country knew anything of Thomas Taylor, the Platonist, while in every American library his translations are found. I said if Plato's Republic were published in England as a new book today, do you think it would find any readers? He confessed it would not. And yet, he added after a pause with that complacency which never deserts a true-born Englishman, and yet we have embodied it all. His opinions of French, English, Irish, and Scotch seem rashly formalized from little anecdotes of what had befallen himself and members of his family in a diligence or stagecoach. His face sometimes lighted up, but his conversation was not marked by special force or elevation. Yet perhaps it is a high compliment to the cultivation of the English generally when we find such a man not distinguished. He had a healthy look, with a weather-beaten face, his face corrugated, especially the large nose. Miss Martineau, who lived near him, praised him to me not for his poetry, but for thrift and economy, for having afforded to his country neighbors an example of a modest household, where comfort and culture were secured without any display. She said that in his early housekeeping at the cottage where he first lived, he was accustomed to offer his friends bread and plainest fare. If they wanted anything more, they must pay him for their board. It was the rule of the house. I replied that it evinced English pluck more than any anecdote I knew. A gentleman in the neighborhood told the story of Walter Scott's staying once for a week with Wordsworth and slipping out every day under pretense of a walk to the Swan Inn for a cold cut and porter. And one day passing with Wordsworth the inn, he was betrayed by the landlord's asking him if he had come for his porter. Of course, this trait would have another look in London, and there you will hear from different literary men that Wordsworth had no personal friend, that he was not amiable, that he was parsimonious, etc. Landor, always generous, says that he never praised anybody. A gentleman in London showed me a watch that once belonged to Milton, whose initials are engraved on its face. He said he once showed this to Wordsworth, who took it in one hand, then drew out his own watch and held it up with the other before the company. But no one making the expected remark, he put back his own in silence. I do not attach much importance to the disparagement of Wordsworth among London scholars. Who reads him well will know that in following the strong bent of his genius, he was careless of the many, careless also of the few, self-assured that he should, quote, create the taste by which he is to be enjoyed. He lived long enough to witness the revolution he had wrought and to, quote, see what he foresaw. There are torpid places in his mind. There is something hard and sterile in his poetry, want of grace and variety, want of due catholicity, and cosmopolitan scope. He had conformities to English politics and traditions. He had egotistic puerilities in the choice and treatment of his subjects. But let us say of him that alone in his time he treated the human mind well and with an absolute trust. His adherence to his poetic creed rested on real inspirations. The Ode on Immortality is the high watermark which the intellect has reached in this age. New means were employed, and new realms added to the empire of the muse by his courage. Chapter 18, Result. England is the best of actual nations. It is no ideal framework. It is an old pile built in different ages, with repairs, additions, and makeshifts. But you see the poor best you have got. London is the epitome of our times and the Rome of today. broad-fronted, broad-bottomed Teutons. They stand in solid phalanx, foursquare to the points of compass. They constitute the modern world. They have earned their vantage ground and held it through ages of adverse possession. They are well marked and differing from other leading races. England is tender-hearted. Rome was not. England is not so public in its bias. Private life is its place of honor. Truth in private life, untruth in public, marks these home-loving men. Their political conduct is not decided by general views, but by internal intrigues and personal and family interests. They cannot readily see beyond England. The history of Rome and Greece, when written by their scholars, degenerates into English party pamphlets. They cannot see beyond England. Nor in England can they transcend the interests of the governing class. English principles mean a primary regard to the interests of property. England, Scotland, and Ireland combine to check the colonies. England and Scotland combine to check Irish manufactures and trade. England rallies at home to check Scotland. In England, the strong classes check the weaker. In the home population of near 30 million, there are but 1 million voters. The church punishes dissent, punishes education, down to a late day. Marriages performed by dissenters were illegal. A bitter class legislation gives power to those who are rich enough to buy a law. The game laws are a proverb of oppression. Pauperism encrusts and clogs the state, and in hard times becomes hideous. In bad seasons, the porridge was diluted. Multitudes lived miserably by shellfish and seaware. In cities, the children are trained to beg until they shall be old enough to rob. Men and women were convicted of poisoning scores of children for burial fees. In Irish districts, men deteriorated in size and shape. The nose sunk, the gums were exposed, with diminished brain and brutal form. During the Australian immigration, multitudes were rejected by the commissioners as being too emaciated for useful colonists. During the Russian War, few of those that offered as recruits were found up to the medical standard, though it had been reduced. The foreign policy of England, though ambitious and lavish of money, has not often been generous or just. It has a principal regard to the interest of trade, checked, however, by the aristocratic bias of the ambassador, which usually puts him in sympathy with the continental courts. It sanctioned the partition of Poland. It betrayed Genoa, Sicily, Parma, Greece, Turkey, Rome, and Hungary. Some public regards they have. They have abolished slavery in the West Indies and put an end to human sacrifices in the East. At home, they have a certain statute hospitality. England keeps open doors, as a trading country must, to all nations. It is one of their fixed ideas, and wrathfully supported by their laws in unbroken sequence for 1,000 years. In Magna Charta, it was ordained that all merchants shall have safe and secure conduct to go out and come into England, and to stay there, and to pass as well by land as by water, to buy and sell by the ancient allowed customs without any evil toll, except in time of war, or when they shall be of any nation at war with us. It is a statute and obliged hospitality and peremptorily peremptorily maintained. But this shop rule had one magnificent effect. It extends its cold, unalterable courtesy to political exiles of every opinion, and is a fact which might give additional light to the portion of the planet seen from the farthest star. But this perfunctory hospitality puts no sweetness into their unaccommodating manners, no check on that puissant nationality which makes their existence incompatible with all that is not English. What, what we must say about a nation is a superficial dealing with symptoms. We cannot go deep enough into the biography of the spirit who never throws himself entire into one hero, but delegates his energy in parts or spasms to vicious and defective individuals. But the wealth of the source is seen in the plenitude of English nature. What variety of power and talent, what facility and plenteousness of knighthood, lordship, ladyship, royalship, loyalty. What a proud chivalry is indicated in Collins's peerage through 800 years. What dignity resting on what reality and stoutness. What courage in war, what sinew in labor. What cunning workmen, what inventors and engineers, what seamen and pilots, what clerks and scholars. No one man and no few men can represent them. It is a people of myriad personalities. Their many-headedness is owing to the advantageous position of the middle class, who are always the source of letters and science. Hence the vast plenty of their aesthetic production. As they are many-headed, so they are many-nationed. Their colonization annexes archipelagos and continents, and their speech seems destined to be the universal language of men. I have noted the reserve of power in the English temperament. In the island, they never let out all the length of all the reins. There is no berserker rage, no abandonment or ecstasy of will or intellect like that of the Arabs in the time of Muhammad, or like that which intoxicated France in 1789. But who would see the uncoiling of that tremendous spring, the explosion of their well-husbanded forces? Must follow the swarms which, pouring now for 200 years from the British Islands, have sailed and rowed and traded and planted through all climates, mainly following the belt of empire, the temperate zones, carrying the Saxon seed, with its instinct for liberty and law, for arts and for thought, acquiring under some skies a more electric energy than the native air allows. The conquest of the globe. Their colonial policy, obeying the necessities of a vast empire, has become liberal. Canada and Australia have been contented with substantial independence. They are expiating the wrongs of India by benefits, first in works for the irrigation of the peninsula and roads, in telegraphs, and secondly, in the instruction of the people to qualify them for self-government, when the British power shall be finally called home. Their mind is in a state of arrested development, a divine cripple like Vulcan, a blind savant like Huber and Sanderson. They do not occupy themselves on matters of general and lasting import, but on a corporeal civilization, on goods that perish in the using. But they read with good intent, and what they learn they incarnate. The English mind turns every abstraction it can receive into a portable utensil or a working institution. Such is their tenacity, and such their practical turn, that they hold all they gain. Hence, we say that only the English race can be trusted with freedom, freedom which is double-edged and dangerous to any but the wise and robust. The English designate the kingdom's emulous of free institutions as the sentimental nations. Their culture is not an outside varnish, but is thorough and secular in families and the race. They are oppressive with their temperament, and all the more that they are refined. I have sometimes seen them walk with my countrymen when I was forced to allow them every advantage, and their companions seemed bags of bones. There is cramp limitation in their habit of thought, sleepy routine, and a tortoise's instinct to hold hard to the ground with his claws, lest he should be thrown on his back. There is a drag of inertia which resists reform in every shape. Law reform, army reform, extension of suffrage, Jewish franchise, Catholic emancipation, the abolition of slavery, of impressment, penal code, and entails. They praise this drag under the formula that it is the excellence of the British Constitution, that no law can anticipate the public opinion. These poor tortoises must hold hard, for they feel no wings sprouting at their shoulders. Yet somewhat divine warms at their heart and waits a happier hour. It hides in their sturdy will. Will, said the old philosophy, is the measure of power, and personality is the token of this race. Quid vult, valde vult. What they do with a will. You cannot account for their success by their Christianity, commerce, charter, common law, parliament, or letters, but by the contumacious, sharp-tongued energy of English naturel, with a poise impossible to disturb, which makes all these its instruments. They are slow and reluctant, and are like a dull, good horse, which lets every nag pass him, but with whip and spur will run down every racer in the field. They are right in their feeling, though wrong in their speculation. The feudal system survives in the steep inequality of property and privilege, and the limited franchise in the social barriers which confine patronage and promotion to a caste, and still more in the submissive ideas pervading these people. The fagging of the schools is repeated in the social classes. An Englishman shows no mercy to those below him in the social scale, as he looks for none from those above him. Any forbearance from his superiors surprises him, and they suffer in his good opinion. But the feudal system can be seen with less pain on large historical grounds. It was pleaded in mitigation of the rotten borough that it worked well, that substantial justice was done. Fox, Burke, Pitt, Erskine, Wilberforce, Sheridan, Romilly, or whatever national man were by this means sent to Parliament when their return by large constituencies would have been doubtful. So now we have that the right measures of England are the men it bred, and it has yielded more able men in 500 years than any other nation. And though we must not play Providence and balance the chances of producing 10 great men against the comfort of 10,000 mean men, yet retrospectively we may strike the balance and prefer one Alfred, one Shakespeare, one Milton, one Sidney, one Raleigh, one Willington to a million foolish Democrats. The American system is more democratic, more humane, yet the American people do not yield better or more able men, or more inventions or books or benefits than the English. Congress is not wiser or better than Parliament. France has abolished its suffocating old regime, but is not recently marked by any more wisdom or virtue. The power of performance has not been exceeded, the creation of value. The English have given importance to individuals, a principal end and fruit of every society. Every man is allowed and encouraged to be what he is, and is guarded in the indulgence of his whim. Magna Charta said Rushworth is such a fellow that he will have no sovereign. By this general activity and by this sacredness of individuals, they have in 700 years evolved the principles of freedom. It is the land of patriots, martyrs, sages, and bards. And if the ocean out of which it emerged should wash it away, it will be remembered as an island famous for immortal laws, for the announcements of original right, which make the stone tables of liberty. Chapter 19, Speech at Manchester. Final chapter. A few days after my arrival at Manchester in November 1847, the Manchester Athenaeum gave its annual banquet in the Free Trade Hall. With other guests, I was invited to be present and to address the company. In looking over recently a newspaper report of my remarks, I inclined to reprint it as fitly expressing the feeling with which I entered England, and which agrees well enough with the more deliberate results of better acquaintance recorded in the foregoing pages. Sir Archibald Alison, the historian, presided and opened the meeting with a speech. He was followed by Mr. Cobden, Lord Brackley, and others, among whom was Mr. Cruikshank, one of the contributors to Punch. Mr. Dickens's letter of apology for his absence was read. Mr. Gerald, who had been announced, did not appear. On being introduced to the meeting, I said, "Mr. Chairman and gentlemen, it is pleasant to me to meet this great and brilliant company, and doubly pleasant to see the faces of so many distinguished persons on this platform. But I have known all these persons already. When I was at home, they were as near to me as they are to you. The arguments of the League and its leader are known to all the friends of free trade. The gaieties and genius, the political, the social, and parietal wit of Punch go duly every fortnight to every boy and girl in Boston and New York. Sir, when I come to sea, I found the History of Europe by Sir A. Alison on the ship's cabin table, the property of the captain, a sort of program or playbill to tell the seafaring New Englander that he shall find on his landing here, what he shall find on his landing here. And as for Dumby, sir, there is no land where paper exists to print on, where it is not found. No man who can read that does not read it. And if he cannot, he finds some charitable pair of eyes that can, and hears it. But these things are not for me to say. These compliments, though true, would better come from one who felt and understood these merits more. I am not here to exchange civilities with you, but rather to speak of that which I am sure interests these gentlemen more than their own praises, of that which is good in holidays and working days, the same in one century and in another century, that which lures a solitary American in the woods with a wish to see England, in the moral peculiarity of the Saxon race, its commanding sense of right and wrong, the love and devotion to that. This is the imperial trait, which arms them with the scepter of the globe. It is this which lies at the foundation of that aristocratic character, which certainly wanders into strange vagaries, so that its origin is often lost sight of, but which, if it should lose this, would find itself paralyzed, and in trade and in the mechanic's shop, gives that honesty in performance, that thoroughness and solidity of work, which is a national characteristic. This conscience is one element. And the other is that loyal adhesion, that habit of friendship, that homage of man to man, running through all classes, the electing of worthy persons to a certain fraternity, to acts of kindness and warm and staunch support from year to year, from youth to age, which is alike lovely and honorable to those who render and those who receive it, which stands in strong contrast with the superficial attachments of other races, their excessive courtesy and short-lived connection. You will think me very pedantic, gentlemen, but holiday though it be, I have not the smallest interest in any holiday except as it celebrates real and not pretended joys. I think it just, in this time of gloom and commercial disaster, of affliction and beggary in these districts, and on these very accounts I speak of, you should not fail to keep your literary anniversary. I seem to hear you say that for all that is come and gone yet, we will not reduce by one chaplet or one oak leaf the braveries of our annual feast. For I must tell you, I was given to understand in my childhood that the British island from which my forefathers came was no lotus garden, no paradise of serene sky and roses and music and merriment all the year round. No, but a cold, foggy, mournful country where nothing grew well in the open air but robust men and virtuous women, and these of wonderful fiber and endurance. Their best parts were slowly revealed. Their virtues did not come out until they quarreled. They did not strike 12 the first time. Good lovers, good haters, and you could know little about them till you had them long, and little good of them till you had seen them in action. That in prosperity they were moody and dumpish, but in adversity they were grand. It is not true, sir, is it not true, sir, that the wise ancients did not praise the ship parting with flying colors from the port, but only that brave sailor which came back with torn sheets and battered sides, stripped of her banners, but having ridden out the storm? And so, gentlemen, I feel in regard to this aged England, with possessions, honors, and trophies, and also with the infirmities of 1,000 years gathering around her, irretrievably committed as she now is to many old customs which cannot be suddenly changed, pressed upon by the transitions of trade and new and all incalculable modes, fabrics, arts, machines, and competing populations. I see her not dispirited, not weak, but well remembering that she has seen dark days before. Indeed, with a kind of instinct that she sees a little better in a cloudy day, and that in storm of battle and calamity she has a secret valor and a pulse like a cannon. I see her in old age, not decrepit, but young and still daring to believe in her power of endurance and expansion. Seeing this, I say, all hail, Mother of Nations, Mother of Heroes, with strength still equal to the time, still wise to entertain and swift to execute the policy which mind and heart of mankind requires in the present hour, and thus only hospitable to the foreigner and truly a home to the thoughtful and generous who are born in the soil. So be it, so let it be. If it be not so, if the courage of England goes with the chances of a commercial crisis, I will go back to the capes of Massachusetts in my own Indian stream and say to my countrymen, the old race are all gone, and the elasticity and hope of mankind must henceforth remain on the Allegheny ranges or nowhere.